A billionaire discovered a homeless woman sheltering a frightened lost boy in her tiny apartment instead of turning him away. What happened next was unbelievable. The rain hammered against the cracked windows as Sarah Bennett wrapped an old wool blanket around the shivering child curled up on her worn sofa. She barely had enough food for herself. Yet she split the last bowl of chicken soup in half and smiled as though she had prepared a feast. "Eat," she whispered. "Growing boys need strength." The boy looked no older than 9. Mud covered his sneakers, and dried tears streaked his cheeks. "You're not scared of me?" he asked quietly. Sarah forced a laugh. "I'm more scared of landlords than little boys." For the first time that night, he smiled. Neither of them knew that before sunrise, black luxury SUVs would stop outside the aging apartment building, helicopters would circle overhead, and one of the wealthiest men in the country would knock on Sarah's weathered blue door. And that single knock would change both of their lives forever. Every morning, Sarah's alarm rang at 4:45. Not because she loved waking up early, but because life gave her no choice. She worked 2 cleaning jobs in the city, scrubbing office floors before executives arrived and washing dishes at a neighborhood diner after sunset. Between shifts, she cared for elderly neighbors whenever they needed groceries or company. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days cleaning glass walls that overlooked million-dollar skylines, then returned each night to a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a heater that groaned louder than it warmed. Still, Sarah greeted everyone with kindness. She knew every stray cat in the alley behind her building and carried scraps of food for them in her coat pocket. She remembered birthdays for neighbors whose own families had forgotten. When the cashier at the grocery store accidentally gave her $5 too much in change, Sarah walked 3 blocks back to return it. "You could have kept it," the young cashier said. Sarah smiled. "If I lose my honesty when life gets hard, then I've lost the only thing nobody can take from me." The words lingered long after she left. Years earlier, Sarah had dreamed of becoming a teacher, but medical bills from caring for her late mother drained every savings account she had. She never complained. She simply adjusted. Hope, she believed, didn't require wealth. It required choice. That rainy evening, after finishing her diner shift, Sarah hurried toward the bus stop when she noticed a small figure sitting beneath a broken streetlight. The boy hugged his knees, soaked from head to toe. Cars sped past. No one stopped. Sarah hesitated. She checked the nearly empty wallet in her purse. $12 until payday. Then she looked back at the child. "Sweetheart," she called gently, kneeling several feet away so she wouldn't frighten him. "Are you waiting for someone?" He shook his head. "Do you know where your parents are?" Another shake. "What's your name?" After a long silence, he whispered, "Ethan." She asked if he was hungry. His stomach answered before his mouth did. Sarah bought him the only hot sandwich she could afford from a nearby convenience store. He devoured it in minutes. The store owner suggested calling the authorities immediately, but a citywide communications outage caused delays, and emergency services were overwhelmed by storm-related accidents. The nearest shelter was already closed for the night. Sarah looked outside at the relentless rain. She couldn't leave him there. "You can stay at my place tonight," she said. "Tomorrow morning, we'll make sure you get home safely." Ethan stared at her with disbelief. "You trust me?" "No," Sarah replied with a gentle grin. "I trust that every child deserves to feel safe." She gave him the bed and slept in an old armchair. Around midnight, she heard muffled crying. Walking quietly into the room, she found Ethan clutching a photograph he'd kept hidden inside his jacket. It showed him standing beside a distinguished older man with silver hair. "You miss him?" Sarah asked. "He told me if I ever got lost, I should stay brave." "You did. But what if he can't find me?" Sarah tucked the blanket around his shoulders. "Then we'll help him." Outside, Headlights briefly flashed across the apartment walls before disappearing into the storm. Somewhere across the city, security teams, private investigators, and police officers were conducting an increasingly desperate search for a missing child connected to one of the most powerful families in the nation. Sarah had no idea. To her, Ethan wasn't an heir. He wasn't a headline. He was simply a scared little boy who needed warmth. And sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion become the beginning of the greatest miracles. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through the cracked blinds just as Sarah heard a loud knock at the apartment door. It wasn't the casual tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. It was firm. Measured. The kind of knock that carried authority. Sarah glanced toward Ethan, who had already sat upright on the couch, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay behind me," she whispered. When she opened the door, she found several sharply dressed security officers standing in the hallway. Behind them stood a tall man in a charcoal suit whose silver hair was perfectly combed despite the previous night's storm. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed hours of worry and sleeplessness. The instant he saw Ethan peeking around Sarah's shoulder, every trace of composure disappeared. "Ethan!" the boy gasped. "Grandpa!" He ran straight into the older man's arms, and the two held each other tightly without saying a word. The security team quietly stepped back, giving them space. Sarah watched in stunned silence. Only after a long moment did the older man look at her. "I'm Daniel Whitmore," he said softly. "And I owe you more than I can ever repay." Sarah blinked. The name sounded familiar. Then one of the guards mentioned the Whitmore Foundation, and realization struck. Daniel Whitmore was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country, known for his technology empire, philanthropic projects, and intensely private family life. She looked down at her worn slippers and faded sweater. I didn't know who he was." Daniel smiled. "That may be the greatest gift anyone has given him." He stepped into the apartment and looked around. The furniture was old but spotless. The tiny kitchen smelled faintly of homemade soup. A neatly folded blanket rested where Sarah had slept in the armchair. His eyes settled on the single untouched slice of bread still sitting on the counter. "You gave him your bed, didn't you?" Sarah shrugged. "He needed it more." "And breakfast?" "He ate. That's what matters." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. In a world where many people treated wealth as an opportunity, Sarah had treated his grandson simply as a child. No cameras. No demands. No expectations. Just kindness. Ethan tugged on his grandfather's sleeve. "She stayed awake because I had a nightmare," he said. "She said brave people still get scared sometimes." Daniel turned back to Sarah. "You comforted him?" "Anyone would." He quietly replied, "You'd be surprised." As the security team prepared to leave, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "Please," he said. "Allow me to compensate you." Sarah immediately shook her head. "No." He seemed genuinely confused. "You sheltered my grandson. I helped a child. I'm not selling that. At least let me reimburse your expenses." She smiled politely. The sandwich cost $6.50. Daniel almost laughed. "You're serious?" "I am." He handed her a $10 bill instead. "Then please accept exact repayment, plus enough for another loaf of bread." She hesitated before finally taking it. "Only because Ethan would want me to." The billionaire folded the checkbook and placed it back into his pocket. Money, he realized, could buy almost anything except integrity. Before leaving, Ethan ran back into the apartment and hugged Sarah tightly. "Will I ever see you again?" "I hope not," she teased gently. His face fell. "Because I hope you never get lost again." He giggled. "I'll still miss you." Sarah knelt beside him. "Then be kind to someone else. That way a little piece of our friendship keeps going." Daniel watched the exchange without interrupting. On the drive home, Ethan stared out the tinted window. "Grandpa?" "Yes." "Why doesn't Miss Sarah have nice things?" "She's had difficult circumstances. She deserves better." Daniel looked at his grandson. "She does." That afternoon, instead of returning to his office tower, Daniel asked his driver to take a detour. They parked across the street from Sarah's diner. From inside the car, he watched unnoticed as she greeted every customer with the same warmth she had shown Ethan. An elderly man fumbled through his pockets, realizing he couldn't afford his meal. Before the manager noticed, Sarah quietly paid the difference herself. Later, she wrapped leftover rolls in napkins and slipped them into a bag for a woman waiting outside with 2 children. She never announced what she was doing. She simply did it. Daniel finally understood that the kindness Ethan experienced wasn't extraordinary for Sarah. It was ordinary. It was who she was. The next evening, Sarah arrived home to find several grocery boxes neatly stacked outside her apartment. There was no note. Just fresh vegetables, bread, milk, eggs, and pantry staples. She looked around the hallway, puzzled. Mrs. Alvarez from next door poked her head out. "Did you order all that?" "No." "Well, whoever sent it must think highly of you." Sarah smiled uncertainly and carried everything inside. The following week, a package arrived with warm winter coats for every child in the building and blankets for several elderly tenants. Again, there was no signature. Only a small card with 7 handwritten words. "Kindness deserves to be met with kindness." Sarah never discovered who sent them. But Daniel knew. He wanted to help without making her feel indebted. Meanwhile, trust between them quietly began to grow. Not through grand speeches. Not through publicity. But through simple gestures that honored Sarah's dignity instead of replacing it. One rainy afternoon, Daniel visited the diner openly. The staff froze when they recognized him. Sarah walked over carrying a coffee pot. "What can I get for you?" "A grilled cheese sandwich," Daniel replied. "And coffee?" "Yes, please." As she poured it, he looked around and asked, "Do you ever regret putting others first?" She considered the question. "Sometimes it's exhausting. But I sleep well at night." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've spent decades building companies." "And was it worth it?" "Yes," he admitted. "But I'm beginning to think building people may matter even more." Sarah smiled. "My mother used to say wealth isn't measured by what fills your house. It's measured by what leaves your hands." For a moment, neither of them spoke. 2 people from completely different worlds sat across from each other, connected by a frightened boy, a bowl of soup, and a decision made during one stormy night. Neither realized that their growing friendship was about to face a challenge that money alone could never solve. Over the next several weeks, an unlikely friendship began to take shape. Daniel Whitmore stopped by the diner every Friday evening, always ordering the same grilled cheese sandwich and black coffee. The staff joked that one of the richest men in the country had become addicted to the cheapest item on the menu. But Daniel wasn't coming for the food. He was coming for the conversation. Sarah never treated him like a celebrity or a billionaire. She challenged his opinions, laughed at his dry humor, and reminded him to slow down when he talked too fast. "You know," she told him one evening, "people can't feel heard if you're already planning your next sentence." Daniel chuckled. "My board of directors would disagree. Your grandson wouldn't." That simple reply stayed with him. Ethan, meanwhile, insisted on writing Sarah handwritten letters every week. They were filled with crooked lines and cheerful drawings of birds, rainbows, and stick figures holding umbrellas. One letter read, "Dear Miss Sarah, I gave my lunch to a new student today because he forgot his. Grandpa said kindness is contagious. I think you started the sickness." Sarah laughed until tears filled her eyes. She pinned every letter to her refrigerator with mismatched magnets. The neighbors noticed changes too. Mrs. Alvarez remarked that Sarah seemed happier. The elderly widower downstairs said she hummed while climbing the stairs now. Even the stray cats seemed to gather outside her building more often, as if they sensed hope lingering in the air. Not everyone welcomed Daniel's growing interest in the woman from the apartment building. At a board meeting, one executive quietly warned him. "Sir, the media has begun asking questions about your visits to a local diner. So, they're curious about your relationship with an employee there." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm having lunch. With respect, shareholders may interpret it differently." Daniel's expression hardened. If shareholders are threatened by compassion, they're invested in the wrong company. The room fell silent. But outside the boardroom, rumors spread. Some tabloids suggested Sarah was seeking financial gain. Others implied she had staged Ethan's rescue for publicity. One afternoon, reporters appeared outside the diner, shoving microphones toward her. "Did you know the boy's identity all along? Has Mr. Whitmore promised to buy you a house? Are the two of you secretly negotiating a business deal?" Sarah pushed through politely. "I helped a lost child. That's the whole story." The headlines kept coming anyway. Customers whispered. Some co-workers avoided eye contact. One woman muttered just loudly enough to hear, "Funny how lucky some people get." Sarah returned home emotionally drained. She stared at Ethan's latest drawing on her refrigerator and wondered if accepting Daniel's friendship had only invited trouble into both their lives. The next morning, she left a note with the diner manager requesting fewer shifts. She was considering moving to another neighborhood altogether. When Daniel learned about the media attention, he drove directly to her apartment. She greeted him with tired eyes. "I think it would be better if we didn't see each other for a while." "Because of gossip?" "Because I don't want Ethan growing up hearing lies about the woman who gave him soup." Daniel paused before answering. "My entire career has taught me that lies travel quickly. And the truth? It usually arrives out of breath." Sarah managed a faint smile. "I'm serious." "So am I." He looked directly at her. "You protected my grandson when nobody else stopped. I won't walk away simply because strangers invented stories." She folded her arms. "I don't need rescuing. I know. You can't solve every problem with influence." "No," Daniel agreed. "But I can stand beside someone who doesn't deserve to face it alone." For the first time since the rumors began, Sarah's shoulders relaxed. Yet an even greater obstacle was waiting. Just days later, the owner of the aging apartment building announced that it had been sold to a redevelopment company. Every tenant received notice that they would have 60 days to leave. Panic swept through the residence. Mrs. Alvarez had nowhere else to go. The widower downstairs lived entirely on a small pension. A young single father on the second floor feared his children would have to change schools. Sarah spent her evenings helping neighbors search for affordable housing instead of worrying about herself. When Daniel heard the news, he quietly contacted his legal team. The report they returned was discouraging. The sale was legitimate. The new owners had every legal right to renovate and terminate the leases. "There's nothing we can do?" Daniel asked. His attorney sighed. "Not legally." For the first time in years, Daniel felt powerless. Meanwhile, Sarah packed her belongings into cardboard boxes she collected from the diner. There wasn't much. A few books. Her mother's teacup. The blanket Ethan had used that rainy night, now neatly washed and folded. As she sealed another box, she whispered to herself, "Home isn't walls. It's the people you protect." But despite her brave words, doubt crept in. Maybe life would always be a series of temporary shelters. Maybe kindness could warm a night but never change a future. The evening before the tenants were supposed to begin moving out, Ethan arrived unexpectedly with Daniel. The boy looked around at the stacked boxes and frowned. "Are you leaving?" Sarah knelt beside him. "I have to." "Where will the cats find you?" She smiled sadly. "I think they'll manage." Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out the very first drawing he had ever made for her. On the back, he had written in uneven handwriting, "Families find each other in strange ways." Sarah hugged him tightly, fighting tears. Daniel watched the scene in silence, his jaw set with quiet determination. The law might limit what he could do. Public opinion might twist his intentions. But he had built an empire by refusing to accept impossible answers. And before another sunrise, he would make a decision that would test not only his fortune, but his conviction that genuine kindness deserves more than gratitude, it deserves unwavering commitment. Daniel barely slept that night. Long after the lights in the city had dimmed, he sat in his study looking at a photograph of Ethan smiling beside Sarah on the afternoon they had baked cookies together at the Whitmore estate. It wasn't a staged picture for the press. It was blurry, flour dusted across Ethan's face and Sarah laughing in the background. The image reminded him that the most valuable things in life rarely looked polished. By sunrise, he had reached a decision. He called his legal team, his financial advisors, and the director of the Whitmore Foundation. "I'm not interested in finding Sarah another apartment," he said. "I want a solution that helps everyone being forced out of that building." Within days, negotiations began. The redevelopment company had no obligation to cooperate, but Daniel made an offer that surprised everyone. He purchased the property at a premium on the condition that every current resident could remain until renovated units were completed, and that rents would stay affordable for long-term tenants. News of the agreement spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Alvarez cried when she heard. The widower downstairs removed his cap and whispered, "I thought I was too old for miracles." The young father hugged his children, relieved they wouldn't have to leave their school. When Sarah learned what had happened, she went straight to Daniel. "You didn't have to do this." "No," he replied. "I chose to." "You spent a fortune." "I've spent fortunes on office buildings that meant far less." She looked around at her neighbors celebrating in the courtyard. "You didn't save my home." "I know. You saved theirs." Daniel smiled. That seemed more important. The renovation project became a community effort. Local volunteers painted walls, landscapers donated their time, and businesses contributed furniture and supplies. Residents who had once barely spoken to each other began working side by side. Sarah organized reading circles for neighborhood children while construction crews took breaks to listen to the stories. Ethan visited often, bringing boxes of books from his own collection. One afternoon, he proudly announced, "Miss Sarah, I finished the chapter book you recommended. I knew you could. And I want to help other kids learn too." She handed him another novel. "Then keep reading. Every story you understand becomes a bridge to someone else." Watching from nearby, Daniel realized that Sarah hadn't simply changed Ethan's life. She had changed his vision of success. Months later, the renovated building reopened with bright hallways, safe elevators, and a community room filled with donated books and computers. A plaque near the entrance surprised Sarah. It didn't bear Daniel's name. Instead, it read, "Kindness creates the homes that bricks alone never can." She turned toward him. "You did this." He shook his head. "No. You inspired it." Life continued to change in unexpected ways. With encouragement from Daniel and several retired educators, Sarah finally pursued the dream she had set aside years before. She completed the certifications she needed and accepted a position teaching literacy classes for children and adults in the neighborhood. On her first day, she stood in front of a classroom with chalk in her hand and tears in her eyes. One student asked, "Are you nervous?" She smiled. "A little. Teachers get nervous too. The good ones do. Because they care." Years passed. The reading room grew into a learning center, and the learning center expanded into a scholarship program funded jointly by community donors and the Whitmore Foundation. Children who once struggled to read began mentoring younger students. Families gathered there after work. Hope became something visible. Then came the moment that brought everything full circle. One rainy evening, Sarah noticed a teenage girl sitting alone at a bus stop, clutching a torn backpack and looking completely lost. People hurried by without stopping. Sarah walked over with an umbrella. "Are you all right?" The girl admitted she had nowhere safe to stay that night after a family emergency. Without hesitation, Sarah contacted trusted local services, stayed with the girl until help arrived, and made sure she was never left alone. As they waited, the frightened teenager asked, "Why are you helping me?" Sarah smiled softly. "Because years ago, someone reminded me that one night of kindness can change a lifetime." Standing across the street, Ethan, now older and taller, watched the scene unfold. He turned to his grandfather. "She's doing it again." Daniel nodded. She never stopped. The ripple that began with a bowl of soup and a borrowed bed had spread farther than either of them could have imagined. Sarah had moved from surviving to thriving. Daniel had moved from accumulating wealth to investing in people. And Ethan had grown up believing that compassion was not an exception reserved for extraordinary moments but a daily choice available to everyone. This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments. 5 years after that stormy night, the neighborhood looked almost unrecognizable. The once faded apartment building now stood as a symbol of resilience rather than hardship. Flower boxes lined the windows, children laughed in the courtyard after school, and the community library on the first floor buzzed with activity every afternoon. Sarah Bennett had become the heart of it all. By day, she taught reading and writing to children who had fallen behind in school and adults who had never been given the chance to learn. By evening, she volunteered at the Learning Center, refusing to let a single student leave without encouragement. Her favorite phrase was written across the classroom wall. "Your circumstances may shape your story, but they do not have to write the ending." The students repeated those words so often that they became part of the building's identity. Daniel Whitmore also found himself transformed. Although he continued leading his business empire, his priorities had shifted. The Whitmore Foundation expanded its investments in affordable housing, literacy programs, and emergency family assistance. Whenever reporters asked what inspired the change, Daniel smiled and answered with remarkable simplicity. "A woman with very little showed my family what abundance really looks like." He never mentioned the size of his donations. He preferred talking about the people whose lives had been changed. Ethan grew into a thoughtful young man with an endless curiosity and a deep sense of responsibility. He spent weekends mentoring younger children at the community center and often joked that Sarah still assigned him homework even when she wasn't officially his teacher. One afternoon, he handed her a neatly wrapped package. Inside was the same photograph he had clutched on the night they met, now restored and framed. On the back, he had written, "Thank you for giving a scared little boy a place to feel safe when the world seemed too big." Sarah held the frame close to her chest. "I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me that kindness is never wasted." Word of their story spread far beyond the city. Teachers shared it with students. Parents told it at bedtime. Community organizations cited it as proof that compassion could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Yet Sarah always corrected one detail whenever people called her extraordinary. "I didn't perform a miracle," she would say. "I opened my door." And perhaps that was the miracle after all. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Sarah locked up the learning center and noticed a little girl trying to carry a stack of books that was clearly too heavy. Without a word, Ethan walked over and picked up half the pile. Daniel, watching from nearby, smiled quietly. The lesson had been passed on. No speeches. No cameras. Just another simple act of kindness. As they walked home together, Sarah looked up at the glowing windows of the building that had once seemed destined for demolition. Families shared dinners. Neighbors chatted on balconies. Children raced bicycles across the courtyard. A place that had nearly disappeared had become a thriving community because people chose generosity over indifference. The greatest transformation, however, could not be measured in renovated walls or charitable donations. It was measured in trust restored. In hope rediscovered. In strangers becoming family. And in the understanding that a single compassionate decision, made without expectation of reward, can echo through countless lives for years to come. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this touched your heart, please like this video, it helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. You may never know how deeply your encouragement, your generosity, or even a warm meal can affect another person. The smallest gesture at the right moment can become the turning point in someone else's story. So ask yourself, what act of kindness will you perform this week? Share your answer in the comments below and inspire someone else to do the same. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the power to change someone's entire world, often with nothing more than an open heart and the courage to act.